Mic check 1 2 3. Mic check 1 2 3.
Good morning. Today is March 24th. Welcome to the sole voting member of the Hamilton Farmers Market meeting. As we have quorum present for today's meeting, I'd like to call this meeting to order. As a reminder to everyone in the room joining us today, all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Madam Clerk, can you advise of any items included in the addendum to today's agenda?
Deputy Mayor, there are no added items, but the presentation, which was originally listed as to be distributed, has been added.
Thank you. With that addendum noted, may I please have a mover and a seconder to approve today's agenda? Thank you, Councillor Kretsch. Councillor Taddison, is there any discussion on the agenda? Not seeing any discussion. Moved by Councillor Kretsch, seconded by Councillor Taddison. That vote by a show of hands. And if you're joining us online, you'll have to turn your screen so we can see your hand. Is that carried? Perfect. Are there any declarations of interest for today's meeting? Seeing none, may I please have a mover and a seconder to adopt the minutes of our previous meeting? These were on October 28th, 2024. Councillor Kretsch, seconded by Councillor Wang. Is there any discussion on the previous meeting's minutes? Seeing no discussion, moved by Councillor Kretsch, seconded by Councillor Wang, that the minutes from October 28th, 2024 be received. Please raise your hands if you're in favor. That vote carries. We are now on to items for consideration. This is item 8.1, governance and operational model recommendations for the Hamilton Farmers Market. As this item includes a presentation, I will now invite staff to introduce our presenters. I'm going to pass this over to Chief Real Estate Officer Ray Kessler, and I know some of the other folks may be making their way over from the Convention Center as well.
Through the chair, thank you, Ray Kessler, Chief Corporate Real Estate Officer. Let me just provide a brief little overview and introduce the presenters. Back in 2020, staff were given the direction to undertake a governance and operational review. We retained the firm of Optimus SBR to undertake that review. Several years or halfway into that exercise, we were also then directed to pause and undertake a visioning exercise, of which this came back here and was approved in 2023. Subsequent to that, we continued on with the consulting assignment, and what we have before you today is both a staff report making recommendations with respect to future governance changes, as well as a presentation here and a report from the consultants. And so let me just introduce the consultants today. Here with us is David Lynch and Melissa Merkley. They are both with SBR and will be conducting the presentation, which is really the outcome of their study and analysis and recommendations.
Thank you. David and Melissa, are they joining us virtually? Perfect. So David and Melissa, the floor is yours. We have about 10 minutes budgeted. If it starts going over something like that, that's no worries. If it's going to go a lot over, we just have to have a little bit of a vote there to extend your time. But with all that said, if you're having any technical difficulties, happy to kind of help you out, but the floor is really yours. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. And yes, we'll try to keep our remarks brief, but obviously happy to answer questions. So in terms of project context, obviously the market's been a cultural destination for the last 175 years. It was incorporated in 2014 and is governed by a board of directors made up of citizen, vendor, and councillor or shareholder representation. But it also has the unique feature that market staff are employees of the City of Hamilton. And as was introduced, we were asked to look at governance maturity, operational challenges, financial sustainability, and strained stakeholder relations. In terms of the work we did, at Optimus, we like to talk about project mission and success, where mission is the nuts and bolts of what we've been asked to do, and project success is the more intangible things that our clients have been looking to get out of an engagement. So obviously, in this case, we're asked to do a governance and operational review of the farmers market, and those more intangible things we were trying to do were one, understand the progress made on the previously identified issues from the work done in 2020, 2021, and then obviously validate where the things were when we came back after the pause, and then obviously build on those findings and give you the recommendations that we're talking about today. We obviously want to have tailored and evidence-driven recommendations related to some of the key gaps that we found in the current state assessment, and then obviously get as much buy-in and involvement from stakeholders as possible. In terms of the current state findings, I'll hand it over to Melissa to go through those, and then I'll discuss the future state recommendations.
Great. Good morning, everybody. So I just want to take an opportunity to just kind of walk you through the current organizational classification and structure of the farmers market. So it is currently classified as a municipal corporation and subject to the Municipal Act. I just want to draw your eye to a couple of little pieces here because it will come up again later. So you'll see at the very top, you have the City Council as the sole voting member. There is a board of directors, of course, for the market. And most interestingly, I'd like you to just look at where the market manager lies in the middle, with the solid line to the contract manager at the City of Hamilton reporting directly to that person, and the dotted line to the board of directors. Additionally, I just wanted to draw your eye at the bottom to the City of Hamilton in-kind support to the market. So these are services provided to the market through the city, which include finance, procurement, legal, IT, facilities management, HR. So quite a number of functions. And like I said, this will come up later. So just wanted to draw your eye. Part of our work, as Dave mentioned, was to look at kind of operational findings and also governance findings. So I just wanted to start with some of the operational findings quickly. The big pieces here in terms of infrastructure, I mean, the history of the market, it's very well respected and it is considered a cultural institution in the city. However, it is an aging building and has many maintenance issues. So this can pose some challenges for the vendors in their operations. Vendors do have access to things like water and heat, of course, to run their businesses, but there is limited equipment and services. So, for example, not all vendors have sinks, which can make it really challenging to clean up, and a few other things that are kind of just important when we think about aging infrastructure. In terms of the location, so there were a number of concerns that were raised through stakeholder engagement, primarily about the market's location and accessibility. A few things is specifically around the floor plan, and that it's not considered to be well laid out by folks who use it, and also by the vendors. Transit is challenging to access the market, and customers have to walk from the bus terminal down the street. So it's very challenging for folks who don't have a car, and as well, there's only 1 hour of free parking. It is improving, but there were and still remain some concerns around community safety in the area surrounding the market. Although a positive I would say is that there has been a layout study by the city to optimize the use of the space so that there's a place for people to enjoy it a little bit more. And there are lots of construction projects in the area, so some condo buildings that are going up, which are likely to increase customer base in the end. But of course, it might impact some customers while the construction is ongoing. In terms of operating hours, so vendors are contracted to be operational during the hours of the market, but it's not really enforced. So vendors tend to keep their own hours, which can be challenging for customers who are coming to see a particular vendor and they're not there. But there is also a sense that the farmers are not set up for success by having to commit to 4 days in the market. If the commitments were shorter, like weekends only, it might encourage more local farmers to participate. Because that's also a key finding, that there are not many farmers who are participating in the market. In terms of customer experience, there's very strong customer loyalty to the market and a very strong repeat customer base, which is fantastic. We did mention, of course, that sometimes the vendors are not there to sell during hours, which can be really challenging for those customers who are going there. And there's also, importantly, very few areas for customers to sit, have a coffee, interact, dine, and this is very high on the wish list for many customers. In terms of marketing and communications, there were some concerns that were raised. Specifically, that signing isn't very strong, so it's challenging to find the market. But what we did here is that the market's been a really strong incubator for new businesses, some of which have moved out of the market and into downtown to have permanent structures, which is really fantastic. And importantly, as I alluded to before, some vendors feel that the name farmers market is a little misleading because there are very few farmers that are represented. And so those are kind of our general findings around operations. I will just move us over to governance findings. So, and again, to remember that I showed you kind of the current structure, so that'll be brought in again here. In terms of the governance model, so the farmers market's been operating with, I'll say an unclear governance model. On paper, it is governed as a municipal service corporation, and that's under the authority of the board, again, on paper. However, in practice, most governance functions are actually carried out by the city. And I'll give you a few examples. So the city and council set and approve the market strategy, with the board providing input. Additionally, the market manager reports to the contract manager who's operated through the city rather than the board. And then finally, the board needs to seek approval from council on the market's budget and spending funds that are held in reserve. This also creates some challenges in roles and responsibilities. So over the last few years, there have been division of roles and responsibilities that have overlapped. So that's resulted in a few redundancies. And I'll give you a couple of examples here as well, some pretty tangible ones. The role of the board appears to currently operate really as an advisory structure. They're making recommendations about the market to the city and council for decision-making instead of leading and owning that vision. And the board does not have oversight responsibility for the market manager or staffing of the market. Additionally, the board does have a role of providing feedback to the contract manager on performance reviews, but doesn't have the authority to actually influence outcomes. So, for example, if their market manager is not performing very well, there's very little they can do about that. And again, that's the person who's intended to be leading the operations of the market. There's a consensus amongst market stakeholders, so the board and also the market manager, that since the governance role of the board has been very limited, they've really been brought into the day-to-day operations of the market, which has created some challenges with the market manager, as you can imagine as well. So they really haven't been set up for success here in terms of, they're bringing the board into approval for many operational decisions instead of more of those strategic and advisory decisions. So it really limits that autonomy of the market manager. Another important one here that I'll bring up is that the board membership continues to be exposed to conflict of interest. So the market, as I mentioned previously, is a municipal services corporation, and therefore it must adhere to the Ontario Municipal Act. And there's the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, of course, that you all know that applies. So this means that members are required to recuse themselves from discussing any matter from which they have a financial interest. And the board actually has 4 vendor members who own businesses within the market. So that means that they must recuse themselves pretty frequently. So that's one challenge. We've alluded to some of the challenges with the relationship with the city, but just to provide a little bit more detail here, the market is very dependent on the city for infrastructure, funding, services, and that's not inherently a governance issue. However, the relationship, roles and responsibilities, and operational expectations of both the city and the farmers market are not really well clearly defined in an accountability agreement or enforced also through effective monitoring and reporting. The city also owns the building where the market resides, but does not receive any rental income from the farmers market. And of course, the city provides a wide array of services to the market. And some of those are charged back and some are in-kind support, but there's really no service level agreements in place to support that. And finally, the last piece I'll just mention on the public perception and branding here is in the past, there was a lot of negative press for the market, which hurt the market's reputation, but this has really improved in the last few years. There's been great public engagement and really a lot of recent strategic efforts to show positive change here. So just wanted to highlight those pieces. The final piece for me is really to kind of share back this market vision. So this is fairly new. In 2023, this was approved by council. And I'll just read this to you, which is that the Hamilton's Farmers Market will continue its long-standing role of supporting local farmers, producers, and businesses while providing a reliable source of fresh food and creating a community gathering destination for downtown residents and all Hamiltonians. So this is something they're actively striving for. I'll pass it on to Dave here to speak about future state.
Thanks, Melissa. So when you're dealing with entities like this, municipalities have sort of a range of options in terms of achieving their strategic goals or providing a service to the community, and how that's structured in terms of corporate form. So, and each of those has varying degrees of city control or influence over those agencies or organizations, and each comes with its own trade-offs. I won't go into detail here, but in terms of the sort of general outline, obviously the city has the most control when something's an internal division of the city, and then it can have arm's length agencies such as a local board or a municipal services corporation over which it retains ultimately control as obviously the sole voting member in this case, but the agency or entity operates at arm's length with independent governance and operations. And then obviously further down the line, you can have arrangements with not-for-profits or independent corporations, or have a joint venture with another entity to achieve some function, or to create an entity that serves a function of the city. So that's sort of been a helpful spectrum for us to think about this particular entity as well as others in the municipal work we've done, and it's informed our recommendations here. Moving on, the recommendations that follow are really actually independent of those corporate forms, but I'll just go into them briefly. So number one, as Melissa's alluded to, one of the clearest thing, or one of the biggest needs, is for clear roles and responsibilities within the accountability agreement. So it's clear what the market is accountable for to the city, and actually with those shared services and other things, what the city is going to provide to the farmers market in terms of back office and things like that. The service level agreements don't exist today, and we think that can often really help clarify roles and responsibilities. And as we've heard, a lot of the challenges the market has had in the past are because those accountabilities are split or not clear amongst the board, the market manager, and the city, and that creates a lot of inefficiencies and challenges in decision making. The second is to achieve that vision. We think the market really requires fostering an entrepreneurial culture driven by a mission-focused leader. They can bring that energy and make this that marketplace, that public space that that the vision calls for, with all of the different participants, and we think those corporate forms will help achieve that. Enhanced stakeholder engagement and collaboration. We did hear that the vendors and others feel disconnected from the market in terms of communicating ideas and concerns, and so we think there needs to be more formal mechanisms to do both the engagement and the collaboration. That could be a vendor advisory committee or a working group that meets regularly with market leadership and potentially the board. And that can be a valuable channel through which vendors can talk about how the market is performing and how everyone can work to improve it. We think investments in infrastructure and facility upgrades are also needed. Melissa outlined a few of the challenges there, but to make it that space that people want to go to, that is appropriate for the vendors and others that use the facilities and sell their wares, we think that's an important part of this. Number 5, enhanced financial sustainability supported by measurable key performance indicators. That's really about, with those clear roles and responsibilities in place, including things like being accountable for revenue, whether it's sponsorship or other things, making it clear what the long-term financial path is, what the KPIs are around that, and having the organization as a whole focused on that, and at the same time driving a thriving marketplace. And then number 6, doing a staffing audit to ensure that the market staffing model can support operations in the way that it needs to, and adapt to what the public and others are looking for from the market. So those are some broad recommendations. They're detailed more in our report, but those are quite important. We go to the final slide, and so we also outline in the report that this fundamentally should stay a municipal service corporation, but On paper, it already is. But we think in terms of the actual functioning of governance and operations, this is, as it says there, a significant departure from the status quo. We think clarity can really help that and operationalize that. And so it will strengthen board governance, have clear accountabilities, and we think they will also allow the market to function with greater autonomy and responsiveness, while at the same time being better aligned to the city's priorities. So accountability agreements really help with that, and making sure that the market can at the same time be nimble and respond to needs as quickly as possible. So we're quite, I think, positive about the future, particularly now that that vision has been outlined. And we hope these recommendations can help bring that to be a reality. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, David and Melissa, for that overview and the presentation. Before we just jump right into questions, could I have a mover and a seconder to put the to receive the presentation and put the recommendations contained within the report on the floor? Thank you, Councillor Crutch, seconded by Councillor Wang. So yep, where the presentation and the recommendations are on the floor. Are there any questions? I do see we have a speakers list, starting with the speakers list currently has Councillor Crutch, followed by Councillor Tattison and Clark. Councillor Crutch.
Thanks. This has been a long time coming, and so I'm glad to see the recommendations here before us. And there's some pretty small changes and then some other bigger changes that are being proposed here. And I won't get into them right now. Primarily, this is about the governance, not the operations, so I'll focus my time on that. When I look at the report and the information here, what I don't see is necessarily an implementation plan. So I'm not sure who's going to answer this question, but that's my biggest concern. When we say that, for instance, we might want to move or shift the way that the Farmers Market Board interacts with the market manager and the employees there. When we think about saying perhaps vendors wouldn't be on the board anymore, we might have a non-voting rep from a vendors association who could attend meetings, these kinds of things. Those little details at the end there aren't articulated through your recommendation, which I'm not suggesting they should have been. My question is, what will happen going forward if this recommendation is approved? How will we come up with an implementation plan, and what will the timing and schedule for doing so be? Because I think that's going to be where the market folks themselves on the board are going to be most concerned and want to have more input and feedback, is understanding exactly what this is going to look like, what changes we're going to be making, and how we're going to implement this. Because right now, I feel like it's at a philosophical or theoretical level, not at a practical one.
Through the chair, should I respond? Or
Apologies. Yeah, I believe unless Chief Real Estate Officer Kessler wants to start that off kind of for the piece, or if it's most appropriate to either of you.
I was going to say, I think staff is best positioned to respond to that.
So through the chair, I'm not certain. I guess I was assuming that questions were now being addressed to the consultant. Just from a procedural perspective, I'm more than happy to answer the question. I'm just not sure whether the questions right now are to the presenter or whether the questions are to the report in general, because that is a recommendation in the
Yes,
report.
so my script has, can we have a mover and seconder to put the presentation on the floor as well as the recommendations in the report? If we want to do those, we can separate them. They're one thing right here. I think people are saying they'd prefer a joint speakers list. So if there's some patience between and being able to maybe address the specific report as well as some of the bigger strategic pieces on one speaker's list, I think that's what I'm hearing from committee is the preference. So maybe, Councillor, do you have the question, or would it be helpful to repeat it?
So through the chair, I think I understand the question. There is a recommendation in the report. It's the last recommendation, I think the third one, that very much speaks to the fact that we were here with a report that both presents the findings of the consultant's work, which, and we're really looking for, obviously, approval from this committee or the sole voting member as to moving forward in that direction. And therefore, following that approval, staff will then work on an implementation plan, which will have all of the details. It's not a black box kind of exercise. Certainly, we will be in consultation with all of the key stakeholders as we do that, but we will bring back an implementation plan that addresses all of the recommendations. Sorry,
Thanks.
I think the corollary or the second part of that question was around timing. Our expectation, it'll probably take about a year to work through all of that work. So it would be early 2026 that we would expect to bring a full, complete implementation plan, which would also speak to transition, as in we're moving from arguably one board structure to a slightly changed board structure. And in that context, there would be a transitional plan around, okay, how do you move from one to the next, right? Is it turn off one day, turn on the next day, as opposed to we probably need to recruit the new board members before we can turn the switch on the new board, and things of that nature that we would address as part of that plan.
Just Councillor Crutch, before you start, I think it is Melissa has some additional feedback. Melissa?
Through the chair, thank you. I just wanted to share that within the report, there are implementation considerations. So to your point, it doesn't include a full implementation plan, but there are some more tangible steps that are included there that could help build out that implementation plan. So to use as a bit of a starting point, in case helpful context, just wanted to share that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that foundation, and thanks for clarifying. I think what I'm trying to understand here is, because the way I read this was exactly that way, that city staff are going to be the ones to come up with the operational framework. What I'm wondering is why we've chosen that route. It seems like what we have are implementation considerations from these folks we hired because they're the experts in doing this governance review, but then we're going to do the governance implementation. Like, I just find it a bit confusing as to why we wouldn't be having them actually come up with a specific concrete plan. They've already started this work and been doing it for years. It would seem it would also be quicker for them to just finish this off by perhaps coming in and doing an implementation report in the next few months than having staff start this work from scratch. I just don't understand why we're doing it this way. So someone could address that, it'd be helpful.
So through the chair, that was not part of the original contract and exercise that they had undertaken. If there's some direction to do that, certainly I suspect they'd be willing. I can't answer for them, but I suspect they would certainly be in a position to be able to assist us in that and accelerate that. Necessarily, there are a lot of as was outlined at a high level by the consultant in the presentation, there's a lot of services that the city currently provides directly to the board, directly and indirectly, and in that context, there is a significant role for city staff to play as we try to sort out an adjustment to how those functions align. At this point, the exercise that the consultants were hired to do has come to a conclusion. If there's a desire to continue to use these consultants moving forward, we could do that. It would require, in essence, a sole source procurement of these consultants. Would require a budget from them, et cetera, but that's certainly within the purview of council to direct.
Thanks. Final comments from me at this point are, yeah, that's helpful to have that context. I think the Farmers Market Board needs to have a look at this, and so I'm grateful to Councillor Huang, who's going to put a motion to refer this back to the Farmers Market Board, because I think it's a chance for them to look at this, digest it, and provide their feedback to us here before we make a decision. Just as a reminder, we did this exact same thing when we had the visioning exercise during this term of council. It came to the sole voting shareholder. We reviewed the presentation. We sent it to the farmers market so they could provide their feedback. They provided their feedback, and then we approved the visioning exercise. So I'm going to hope that we're going to be able to support Councillor Huang's motion to do that, because these changes will have a big impact on the way that the market operates now, in terms of those who are on the market board. And I think the folks who are most impacted will be that board and should have some opportunity to speak to it. and maybe make recommendations about timing and timelines and those kinds of things, including things about maybe a consultant helping us with some of this work in the near future, so we can make sure it's happening consistently with their recommendations and as quickly as humanly possible, because I think that we have a big job ahead of us for the farmers market in terms of the physicality of the market, in terms of all the operational considerations that were mentioned by the consultants. And we need to get this governance review done as soon as possible so we can start moving on to the next step. The longer this takes, I think, frankly, the less potential the market has to be the thing we all want to see it to be, right? A thriving, important part of our civic landscape. It's getting there, but we kind of have to hurry up, I think, a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crutch. We have Councillor Taddison, followed by Councillor Clark on our speakers list right now. Councillor Taddison.
I have a question for David and Melissa on the presentation, and it involves page 5, where they list all the city staff currently working. And I'm wondering, in your work, did you get an actual accounting of how many staff currently work for the city with the market as their focus?
Through the chair, that's a very good pop quiz question. I might just defer for a minute if that's all right while I just do my double check.
Well, I see there's people in procurement, finance, legal, HR, facilities management, technology. So I'm just stalling for time for you.
Appreciate that effort.
Through the chair, I wonder, it might not be them technically working for the market. It might be, providing some services on a partial FTE basis sort of arrangement, that which is typically how these back office arrangement works. The marketing manager and the other, I think 3 others that you see on the org chart there are the ones that are directly employed by the farmers market.
And thanks for the stall, everybody. I might just add here, so just having dug through the report quickly, so it doesn't indicate the number of staff that contribute, and also says that the amount of time that staff we'll say invest, or the amount of effort that they put into supporting the farmers market is not clear. So it hasn't been quantified from what we can tell.
Councillor Taddison, if you don't mind, I think Chief Real Estate Officer Kessler just wanted to jump in as well.
Through the chair, and just to add on to that, that is correct. In a lot of cases, there's an operating agreement between the farmers market and the city. And so there are a number of services. We don't really have an enunciation or clear articulation of particular staff. I don't believe there are staff that are specifically assigned. For example, Susan Nicholson, sitting next to me here, on the bench, provides legal services to the market from time to time. I dare say she might dock it, because I know that is a practice of the legal profession in particular. But we don't charge back, and therefore we don't really particularly keep a running tab of what those costs might be. Similarly, rents, as an example, are paid at the front counter on the first floor often, and through some of that, there's back-of-house financial work that is done by our finance team. It's really, you could say, off the corner of their desks. In other words, it's another part of their overall mandate and function, but not specifically allocated in that way, unlike the staff that work directly at the market.
Okay, thanks for that insight. I like the recommendations. I also like the recommendations to refer back, because I think that's important information, because this report speaks to the impacts of the proposed recommendations may have on the type of staffing employed by the market, and that as a result of these recommendations being implemented, staff may bring forward staffing implementation, implications for consideration. So again, I'm uncomfortable with this gray area of potentially hiring more staff when not really having accounting of where we are right now with staffing. And so for me, it is a bit of a black box, and I need to be, as a governor, accountable to the taxpayer. So again, I'm glad that we're looking at referring it back. Maybe that'll give us more time to get some more information. And I'll now cede the floor to Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Taddison. Just a couple of questions, and it's more for clarifications for me. when it talks about it's an arm's length agency being proposed, and then it speaks to a dedicated board of directors. So would this board of directors include vendors from the market, or would this board of directors be people who are experienced and have an excellent understanding of how to run a corporation in a retail environment? And then there would be a separate organization that would represent the vendors, almost like a vendors association that could provide feedback to the board. So I'm just trying to understand exactly what the corporate structure recommendations are, if I may.
And through the chair, I guess to unpack that a little bit. So there would be a board of directors, and the current board policy is similar to what a traditional board would have. We haven't provided specific recommendations on the form of that board. So the expertise and the skill sets are entirely up to staff to determine. We don't think it's appropriate for vendors to have, as Melissa outlined, voting power on the board. So the structure, whether it's an advisory council or, as was mentioned earlier, a non-voting board role, might be another way that it could be done. In our view, the important thing is that it has that autonomous governance and operational ability. And as we understand it, staff are going to work on that, on the specifics of what that board composition looks like and the role of the vendors to ensure that their voices are heard as things develop.
Thank you for that. And I'm encouraged to hear that recommendation. It's been one of the things that I had pointed out many times when we talked about this farmers market. Actually, we've talked about it many times if I look at Councillor Jackson and Councillor Maureen Wilson. So this has been a struggle for us. We have had a situation where the vendors are, I wouldn't use the term aggressive, but they are impassioned by their role. They want the market to succeed, but they also want their own company, their own service to succeed. And so on occasion, there are conflicts that erupt. And it was challenging to contain because the structure and the governance model was not there. And so I'm hoping that we can finally put an excellent governance model, which is what you have recommended, into place, but not ignore the vendors. The vendors need to have a voice to the board. And I would suggest that it be papered in such a manner that it would indicate perhaps, the Market Vendors Association or some nomenclature like that, but that there be direct feedback, that on a regular basis, the board is hearing from the vendors and not leave it to when there's a big argument or objection. They should be involved all the way along. It should be almost an empowerment of vendors to help with the board to succeed, because if the board succeeds, the vendors succeed. If the vendors succeed, the city succeeds. So in my mind, I know that wasn't a question, and I apologize for that, but this has been gnawing at me for many years, and I'm very pleased, and I did not have any direct input into this, so thank you very much for the work that you've done.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I also see Councillor Pauls looking to join the speakers list. Councillor Pauls.
Thank you. And last term, I was on the Hamilton Farmers Market for 4 years. I'm just wondering, we did do a review, we did do a vision exercise, and we had a consultant. Is this a new consultant, a new vision, a new review? It seems like we just do them and nothing comes out of it. And I'm just wondering, is this something new we just started? And what did we do with the old review the old consultant and the old vision exercise?
I think Chief Real Estate Officer Kessler's looking to start us off there.
So through the chair, this is the same consultant that was hired back in 2020 or 2021, actually. I think the direction was late 20 that we were given to hire a consultant. So it's the same consultant. They started the governance review back then. When they brought forward their interim report, then council directed us to undertake a visioning exercise. So that visioning exercise has been completed and approved by council. There's a new vision and approach, or well, I'll just say there's a new vision to what the market is intended to become. Following that approval, the same consultants were retained to complete the work that they had initiated. There was a bit of an adjustment to that because now they had a vision as well. And so it's certainly been my insight and understanding of the outcome of the work that is being presented here today that is a reflection of the vision. And so the governance recommendations are intended to support the vision that council had already approved. So it's all, in some respect, you could say it's blended. It was a different consultant who did the visioning exercise, mind you. But having said that, the two are now, in essence, dovetailed at the point where we are today, where we have governance recommendations that are intended to support the vision that council has for the market.
Thank you for that. It seems like it's 5 years has gone. The time goes really fast, and it seems like we're in the same position as we were before. But one question I noticed that the consultant said that operation hours, and I remember being on the board, that was a number one problem. Some are open, some are not. You mentioned something like maybe it should be only on the weekend because that's when the farmers can do it. When you mean only weekends, you mean Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or what was your consultant? What do you think is the most that the vendors would want?
Through the chair, so for the hours, what really came out here, there were a couple pieces. So I know the hours have shifted for the farmers market in the last year or so. They've experimented with a few to see if that would support kind of vendors and farmers in particular. In joining. But what we had heard is because they're 4 days, farmers, they work 7 days a week, long hours, and to be in the market for 4 of those days it's just not really sustainable for most farmers, quite frankly. And so the idea was if you could, limit that to 2 days per week just for farmers and perhaps have, a rotating basis, for example, so that the vendor stalls are still being used in that time to maximize that. That it would encourage them to come regularly and to participate more in the farmers market. So that was just kind of the takeaway, is that farmers work pretty well 7 days a week, at least 5, and that 4 days in the market is just not really sustainable for most. But that experimenting with 2 days a week mandatory for farmers to participate would probably encourage more to participate.
My last question is the main thing when I was last term, the 4 years of really being very hard 4 years of being on that market, the main concern beside ours was parking. I know that downtown is changing. I know the parking is going to be changed, taken away because of new apartment buildings. I'm wondering, is that a concern still in the location of the market? The market is in a basement. Are those still the concern of location, parking, and hours? Are those the 3 things that we really have to tackle before we see success in the market?
Through the chair, the parking was certainly brought up again in the phase 2. So to your point, there was a bit of a pause in our work and then we came back. Parking was still cited as being a challenge. And that's because the majority of people that go to the market drive there. So there is, 1 hour free parking for many if they can find it. But also there's accessibility challenges. So it is still very much a challenge.
All right, so those are the issues I think that we have to work out. I know it's a destination place, but if you don't have parking, if you don't have, accessibility, well, those are challenges. So thank you, and I hope we can move on from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pauls. Councillor Wang, you're the only name on our speakers list.
Thank you, Chair. As spoken before, I'd like to move to refer this whole presentation and report to the Hamilton Farmers Market Board and have that returned back to us for a decision after their input. And that would be moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Crutch, please.
All right. Is there any discussion on the direction for that referral? So going back to the Farmers Market Board, so we can get some feedback from them on these recommendations before considering them. Councillor Clark.
So what are we asking the vendors to do? This document, as it goes over to them for, I guess, their input, did they have input prior to this?
I know the chair of the board's raised their hand. I know staff will say, I also know there's in the kind of engagement summary in the report as well, but I think if you're willing, Councillor Crutch as chair has offered to provide an answer.
Oh, I'm fine, absolutely.
Yeah, so the board did some recruitment in this term of council, and there's a bunch of citizen members, there's vendors, and there's myself and Councillor Huang, and we were involved in the discussions and consultation, but no one on the board has ever seen the actual recommendations. So it'll be a surprise, for instance, for people on the board to know about anything that the consultant has actually recommended.
Okay. And so we are expecting a report back, as now speaking as a councillor, we are to expect a report back that will be drafted by Optimus, I think, to tell us what the input was from the vendors. I just want to make it very clear what our expectations are for the report back.
So currently the motion is referring this report to the Farmers Market Board. So in their minutes of their next meeting, if they endorse, if they provide comment, if they wrote a letter, but it would be up to the board themselves to maybe structure that feedback. We could talk about what the request is, and I know our clerk's team is offering me some advice.
So through the Deputy Mayor, my understanding based on Councillor Wang's motion is that the report and the presentation be referred to the board. The board may put some comments into a communications of some form that would come back to the shareholder along with this report would be back on the floor, is my take on it.
So no additional work being directed to our staff team or to the consultant at this time, but just asking for the board's feedback on the work that's been produced to date.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
Is there any other questions, comments, or discussion on the direction for this referral? Councillor Tadison.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say and re-emphasize that these recommendations support the market to function with greater autonomy and responsiveness while maintaining alignment with the city's priorities. So that's what it says in the report. The enhanced focus on board effectiveness, stakeholder engagement, blah, blah, blah. For me, what happens is we're giving the HFM more autonomy, and yet if we support, like, are we saying when we send this, when we refer this, that we're actually saying that we're willing to hire more staff? No, we're just referring that, and I want the people that are going to review that to understand that we haven't okayed this, right? So that with this referral, it's just looking for extra collaboration and consultation with them, right? Okay, I appreciate that, and I think that's where Councillor Clark was going as well. Not to put words in your mouth, Councillor, sorry. So, okay, I'll support this, but I just want to understand that I think there's a lot of areas that we need to really look at in the implementation of this before we do give it the final go-ahead. Thanks.
The instructions here are definitely that request for consultation would be the instructions. I saw Councillor Kassar. Did you have questions or comments on the instructions?
Yes, I do. Just around timing, Chair. I know there was comments earlier and that I would agree with about urgency. So just to the mover, is there an awareness of the next Farmers Market Board meeting and when this could come back? As I would like to see timing in the motion if that's at all possible. Thank you. Through you.
Councillor Wang?
I'm just double checking on when our next board meeting is. Councillor Crouch, when's our next board meeting? April 14th. So ideally, we'll put this on the agenda for April 14th and then have those comments back, and then should be moving quickly on the report back. So in terms of timing, I would say that it's going on the next Hamilton Farmers Market Board meeting, and then the cadence of events will happen after that April 14th board meeting. So how do I want to word that then?
So sorry, through the deputy mayor. So if there's on April 14th, my suggestion would be that we schedule another shareholder meeting for late April, early May, and then provided it can be included on the April 14th, then the report as is, I just want to be clear that in your direction, you're not asking for a further report back from staff, correct? Okay, perfect. So then.
So we're going to add, and then another meeting of the Hamilton, of this entity, the shareholders of the Hamilton Farmers Market.
Just do that.
Is created. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I'm happy to schedule one.
Perfect. Does that work with you, Councillor Cassar, in terms of getting that direction on timing pinned down?
Yep, that's helpful, and I think that's a good outcome. Thank you.
I'm not seeing anyone else on the list at this moment in time. So it's been moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor Kretsch, that this be referred to the Hamilton Farmers Market Board of Directors for their feedback. And then we will see this item again after pending that. And this is going to be an electronic vote.
Councillor Francis, are you with us right now? Councillor Pauls? Oh, thank you, Councillor Francis and Councillor Pauls.
That item carries 11-0 unanimously. As the item is referred, that brings us to the end of today's agenda. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned at 11:22 a.m. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.